It was a crisp autumn morning at Lincoln High School, the kind where golden leaves swirled in the breeze outside the classroom windows. Inside room 203, Emily Parker stood at the front of her advanced calculus class, marker in hand, explaining a particularly tricky equation to her students. Known for her sharp wit and high expectations, Emily had earned both respect and a bit of fear from her pupils. Her lessons were challenging, but she always managed to make them engaging, often sprinkling humor into her explanations to keep the students on their toes. As she turned toward the whiteboard to write out another example, the door creaked open slightly. Henry Mitchell, the school janitor, poked his head in. A wiry man in his late 40s with graying hair and a warm smile, Henry was a familiar face around Lincoln High. He moved quietly through the hallways, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and occasionally stopping to chat with teachers or offer a kind word to students who seemed to be having a tough day. Everyone liked Henry. He was dependable, friendly, and carried an air of quiet dignity about him. "Morning, Ms. Parker," Henry said softly, stepping inside just enough to push his mop bucket further into the corner near the door. His voice was calm, almost musical, and it carried none of the awkwardness one might expect from someone interrupting a classroom. Emily glanced over her shoulder, giving him a quick nod. "Morning, Henry. Just finishing up here." She returned, her attention to the board, writing out the final steps of the problem as her students scribbled furiously in their notebooks. The room was silent except for the faint squeak of the marker and the occasional rustle of paper. Henry didn't leave right away. Instead, he lingered by the door watching Emily work. It wasn't unusual for him to pause during his rounds. Sometimes, he'd listen to snippets of history lectures or admire art projects displayed along the walls. But today, something caught his eye. On the desk closest to him lay a stack of papers, calculus worksheets filled with complex equations and graphs. One sheet had slipped off the pile, landing face up on the floor near his feet. Without thinking too much of it, Henry bent down to pick it up. As he straightened, his gaze drifted over the page. His brow furrowed slightly as he scanned the problems. To anyone else, this might have looked like idle curiosity, but to Emily, who happened to glance back at that exact moment, it sparked an idea. "You know," she said suddenly, turning fully toward Henry with a playful grin, "if you're so interested in calculus, maybe you should give it a shot." The comment drew a ripple of laughter from the students. Some snickered under their breath while others exchanged amused glances. They knew Emily's sense of humor well enough to recognize when she was teasing. And besides, everyone assumed Henry wouldn't take the bait. It was just a joke after all. But Henry didn't laugh. Instead, he tilted his head thoughtfully, studying the worksheet in his hands. "Calculus, huh?" he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Then, looking up at Emily, he added, "I haven't done this in years, but I suppose it couldn't hurt to try." Emily blinked, momentarily taken aback. She hadn't expected him to respond seriously. For a split second, she wondered if she'd crossed a line. But then her competitive streak kicked in. Smiling wider, she walked over and plucked the worksheet from his fingers. "Well, if you're offering," she teased, grabbing a clean sheet from the stack on the desk. "Here, let's see what you've got." She handed the fresh worksheet to Henry, who accepted it with a polite nod. The students watched in stunned silence. What had started as a light-hearted quip now felt like an actual challenge. Was Ms. Parker really going to let the janitor attempt calculus? Henry didn't seem fazed. He tucked the paper into the pocket of his uniform shirt and gave Emily a small smile. "I'll take a look at it later," he promised. No promises, though. With that, he picked up his mop bucket and continued on his way, leaving behind a classroom full of bewildered teenagers. Once the door clicked shut, the room erupted into chatter. "Do you think he'll actually try it?" one student whispered. "No way," another replied. "That stuff is hard even for us." Emily shook her head, chuckling to herself as she resumed teaching. She hadn't meant anything by it. It was just a harmless joke. Still, there was a tiny part of her that was curious. Would Henry really attempt the problems, and if he did, could he possibly solve them? For the rest of the day, the incident became the talk of the school. Teachers and students alike speculated about what Henry might do with the worksheet. Some joked that he'd frame it as a trophy, while others bet he'd toss it in the trash, without a second thought. No one, not even Emily, truly believed that anything would come of it. But life has a funny way of surprising people. Little did they know, Henry Mitchell wasn't just any ordinary janitor. Beneath his unassuming demeanor lay a mind sharper than anyone could have guessed, and the events set in motion that morning would soon send shockwaves through Lincoln High School. 2 days passed, and the joke Emily Parker had made about Henry Mitchell solving calculus problems began to fade from everyone's memory. Life at Lincoln High went on as usual. Students shuffled between classes, teachers graded papers, and Henry continued his daily routine of cleaning hallways and tidying classrooms. The worksheet tucked into his shirt pocket seemed like nothing more than a forgotten curiosity, a relic of a fleeting moment meant only for laughs. But Henry wasn't one to let things go so easily. After finishing his shift on Tuesday evening, he sat down in the small break room reserved for school staff. Pulling out the crumpled piece of paper, he smoothed it against the table and studied the equations carefully. His brow furrowed slightly as he traced each problem with his eyes, recalling lessons from decades past. It had been years since he'd last worked on anything remotely close to calculus, but something about the challenge stirred a long-dormant part of him. Henry had always loved math. Back in college, he'd dreamed of becoming a mathematician, spending countless hours poring over textbooks and scribbling solutions in notebooks. But life had other plans. Financial struggles forced him to drop out, and he took whatever jobs he could find to make ends meet. Over time, his dreams of academia faded into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of work and responsibility. Yet even as he traded chalkboards for mops, he never lost his passion for numbers. Whenever he had a spare moment, he'd pick up an old math book or watch online lectures, keeping his mind sharp. That night, after leaving the school, Henry stopped by the local library. He borrowed a thick textbook on advanced calculus and carried it home, where he spent hours flipping through its pages. The problems on the worksheet weren't easy, but they weren't impossible either, not for someone who still remembered the fundamentals. With determination in his heart, Henry got to work. By Thursday morning, he was ready. As he pushed his mop bucket down the hallway toward room 203, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling inside him. He knew what he had done might seem strange or even ridiculous to others, but he couldn't help himself. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about reclaiming a piece of who he used to be. When he reached the classroom door, he hesitated for a moment, listening to the murmur of voices inside. Taking a deep breath, he knocked softly. Emily looked up from her desk, surprised to see him standing there. "Henry, everything okay?" He nodded, stepping inside. "Ms. Parker, do you have a minute? I wanted to show you something." "Curious?" Emily gestured for him to come closer. The students glanced up briefly before returning to their books, assuming this was just another routine visit. Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out the worksheet, now covered in neat handwriting and precise calculations. He handed it to Emily without saying a word. At first, she didn't know what to expect. Maybe he'd written a note or doodled something funny on the page. But as she looked down and saw the answers staring back at her, her expression shifted from mild amusement to stunned disbelief. Every single problem had been solved correctly. And not just that, but Henry had included detailed step-by-step explanations for each solution. His method was meticulous, his logic flawless, and his presentation cleaner than some of her own notes. Emily's mouth opened and closed several times as she tried to process what she was seeing. Finally, she managed to stammer, How did you?" Henry shrugged modestly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Like I said, it's been a while since I've done this kind of thing. I had to brush up a bit, but..." He trailed off, letting the worksheet speak for itself. The room fell silent as Emily flipped through the pages, her eyes widening with every line she read. She couldn't believe what she was holding in her hands. These weren't the haphazard attempts of someone guessing their way through the problems. They were the confident, calculated responses of someone who truly understood the material. And yet, here was Henry Mitchell, the school janitor, standing before her like it was no big deal. "This is incredible," Emily murmured, shaking her head in awe. "I mean, I didn't realize you actually know this stuff?" Henry chuckled softly, clearly embarrassed by the attention. "I used to study math a lot when I was younger. Life kind of got in the way, I guess, but I never forgot it completely." Emily stared at him, her mind racing. She thought back to that morning when she'd handed him the worksheet as a joke. She'd expected nothing to come of it. A few laughs, maybe a polite refusal. Instead, she'd uncovered a hidden talent that defied all expectations. For a moment, she felt guilty for underestimating him, but that feeling quickly gave way to admiration. "Henry," she said finally, looking up at him with newfound respect. "This is amazing. You're amazing. Have you ever thought about teaching?" His smile faltered slightly. "Teaching? Oh no, I'm not cut out for that. I'm just me." "You're selling yourself short," Emily insisted. "Look at this. You explained these concepts better than some of my colleagues could. If you can do this, imagine what else you're capable of." Henry didn't respond right away. He looked down at the floor, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. But there was also a flicker of pride in his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he was more than the role he'd settled into all those years ago. Before either of them could say anything else, the bell rang, signaling the end of class. Students began packing up their things, chatting amongst themselves as they filed out of the room. Emily glanced at Henry, realizing she needed more time to process everything. "We'll talk later, okay?" she said earnestly. "This isn't over." Henry nodded, slipping the worksheet back into his pocket. "Sure thing, Ms. Parker. Thanks for letting me try." As he left the classroom, Emily sank into her chair, still holding the sheet of paper. Her thoughts swirled with questions and possibilities. How had she missed this side of Henry? What else didn't she know about the people around her? And most importantly, what should she do now? She didn't have answers yet. But one thing was certain. Henry Mitchell had just changed the way she saw the world and herself. What started as a simple joke had turned into something far greater, setting the stage for a story that would ripple through the entire school in ways no one could have predicted. By Friday morning, word about Henry Mitchell's calculus worksheet had spread like wildfire through Lincoln High School. It started innocently enough. A few teachers overheard Emily Parker talking animatedly in the faculty lounge during lunch on Thursday. She couldn't contain her excitement as she recounted how Henry, the janitor, had solved every problem correctly and even included detailed explanations. At first, some dismissed it as an exaggeration or a quirky anecdote. But when Emily showed them the worksheet herself, jaws dropped. Principal Robert Carter was among those who heard the buzz. A tall man with graying temples and a calm demeanor, Principal Carter prided himself on running a school where everyone felt valued. When he caught wind of the story, his curiosity got the better of him. He decided to call Henry into his office, not to reprimand him, but to understand what had happened. Henry arrived at the principal's office just before the final bell rang, wiping his hands on a cloth as he stepped inside. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Carter?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. He wasn't sure why he'd been summoned, though he suspected it might have something to do with the worksheet. "Have a seat, Henry," Principal Carter said warmly, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. Once Henry was settled, the principal leaned forward, folding his hands together. "I hear you've been making quite the impression around here lately." Henry blinked, unsure how to respond. "Impression? I'm not sure what you mean." Carter smiled faintly. "Ms. Parker tells me you solved a set of calculus problems she gave you. And not just any problems, advanced ones. Is that true?" Henry shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, yeah, I did. But it wasn't a big deal, just something to pass the time." "Not a big deal?" Carter raised an eyebrow. "Henry, most people wouldn't even attempt something like that, let alone solve it perfectly. Where did you learn math like this?" For a moment, Henry hesitated. Talking about his past wasn't something he enjoyed doing. But there was something about Principal Carter's genuine interest that made him feel safe. Taking a deep breath, he began to explain. I used to study math in college. I wanted to be a mathematician back then, but things didn't work out. Money was tight, so I had to drop out. After that, I took whatever jobs I could find to get by. Eventually, I ended up here. The principal listened intently, nodding as Henry spoke. And yet you kept learning, Carter said thoughtfully. That takes dedication. Not many people would do that after giving up their original dream. I guess I just couldn't let go of it completely, Henry admitted with a small shrug. Math has always been a part of me. Even when I'm mopping floors or fixing things around the school, I think about numbers sometimes. It's comforting, you know? Carter nodded again, his expression thoughtful. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, an idea began to form in the principal's mind. Leaning back in his chair, he asked, Henry, what would you say if I told you we might have a use for your skills here at Lincoln High? Henry frowned, confused. My skills, you mean cleaning? No, Carter said quickly, chuckling. Your math skills. Have you ever considered teaching? Even just helping students who struggle with tough subjects? Teaching? The suggestion caught Henry completely off guard. Me? Teach? Oh no, I couldn't do that, I'm just the janitor. And you're also someone who can solve advanced calculus problems with ease, Carter pointed out gently. Henry, we have kids here who are struggling in math. Some of them need extra help, but our resources are limited. If you're willing, maybe you could tutor a few students after school. Nothing formal, just one-on-one sessions to guide them. Henry stared at the principal, his mind racing. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Could he really step into such a role? What would the students think? What would the teachers think? Despite his doubts, however, a spark of hope flickered within him. Maybe this was his chance to reconnect with the passion he'd buried long ago. I don't know, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I've never taught anyone before. That's okay, Carter reassured him. We'll figure it out together. You won't be alone in this. Ms. Parker has already offered to mentor you if you decide to give it a try. And honestly, Henry, I think the students would benefit tremendously from having someone like you around. Someone who understands what it's like to face challenges and keep going anyway. Henry sat quietly for a moment, considering the offer. He thought about the worksheets he'd solved, the hours he'd spent brushing up on concepts he hadn't touched in years. Most of all, he thought about the look on Emily's face when she realized he wasn't just joking around, that he genuinely knew what he was doing. Maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. All right, he said softly, meeting Carter's gaze. I'll give it a shot, but if it doesn't work out, you'll have to promise not to hold it against me. Carter grinned. Deal. Word of Henry's new role spread quickly. By Monday morning, nearly everyone at Lincoln High knew that the janitor who solved calculus problems was now going to tutor students. Reactions varied wildly. Some teachers were skeptical, wondering if this was just a fleeting experiment. Others, like Emily, were thrilled, eager to see how Henry's unique perspective might inspire struggling students. As for the students themselves, opinions ranged from disbelief to outright fascination. On Tuesday afternoon, Henry held his first tutoring session in an empty classroom. 3 students showed up, each carrying a textbook and looking more nervous than he felt. They shuffled awkwardly into their seats, glancing at him as if waiting for him to announce it was all a joke. But Henry simply smiled, pulled up a chair, and opened one of the textbooks. Okay, he said, his voice calm and steady. Let's start with something simple. Who wants to go first? To his surprise, the students warmed up quickly. There was something disarming about Henry's approach. He didn't lecture or scold. Instead, he guided them patiently, breaking down complex ideas into manageable pieces. By the end of the hour, they were laughing and asking questions without hesitation. When the session ended, one of the students lingered behind. Mr. Mitchell? The boy asked hesitantly. Do you think I'll ever be good at math? Henry looked at him for a moment, remembering his own struggles and triumphs. You will, he said firmly. It won't always be easy, but if you keep trying, you'll get there. Trust me. I know. As the student left, Henry felt a sense of satisfaction he hadn't experienced in years. This was more than tutoring. It was reigniting, a flame within himself proving that dreams don't die unless you let them. Little did he know his journey was only beginning. By the end of the first week, Henry Mitchell's tutoring sessions had become the talk of Lincoln High School. Students who once dreaded math class were now eagerly signing up for his after-school help. Teachers whispered about the change they saw in their struggling pupils. Students who used to give up on problems within minutes were suddenly sticking with them, determined to understand. Word spread beyond the school walls, too, reaching parents and even local news outlets curious about the janitor-turned-tutor phenomenon. Principal Carter watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. He hadn't expected things to move so quickly, but he couldn't deny the positive impact Henry was having. Still, there was one idea lingering in the back of his mind, an idea that felt bold, even risky. If Henry could connect with students in a small classroom setting, what might happen if he stood in front of an entire class? It wasn't just about showcasing talent, it was about inspiring others. Carter believed that seeing someone like Henry step into such a role could send a powerful message. Greatness can come from unexpected places. On Friday afternoon, after the final bell rang, Carter called Henry into his office again. This time, Emily Parker joined them, her arms crossed as she leaned against the wall. When Henry walked in, he immediately sensed something different in the air. The principal's expression was serious but kind, while Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Henry," Carter began, gesturing for him to sit down. "We need to talk about something important." Henry raised an eyebrow, already feeling uneasy. "What is it this time?" Carter smiled faintly. "It's about your tutoring. You've done an incredible job so far. Students are responding well and teachers are impressed. But I think you're ready for something bigger." "Bigger?" Henry repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I'm barely keeping up with the tutoring as it is." "That's why we're here to help," Emily chimed in, stepping forward. "We want you to teach a guest lecture in my calculus class next week." For a moment, Henry just stared at her, unsure he'd heard correctly. "A guest lecture? Me? In front of your whole class?" "Yes, exactly," Emily said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Think about it, Henry. You've already shown these kids that math isn't impossible. You've inspired them. Imagine what you could do with a full lesson plan." Henry shook his head, panic rising in his chest. No, that's not me. I'm not a teacher. I don't know how to handle a whole class." "You handled 3 students without breaking a sweat," Carter pointed out. "And trust me, teaching a group isn't much different. We'll prepare everything together. All you have to do is explain the material the way you always do." "But what will the students think?" Henry asked, his voice cracking slightly. "They'll laugh. Or worse, they'll feel sorry for me." Emily stepped closer, her gaze steady. "They won't. These kids respect you, Henry. They see how hard you work, not just here at the school, but in life. They admire you. And if anyone can make calculus seem less scary, it's you." Henry looked between the two of them, searching for a way out. But deep down, he knew they weren't going to let him off the hook. More than that, a small part of him wanted to try. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was the same stubborn determination that had driven him to solve those problems in the first place. Whatever it was, he found himself nodding reluctantly. "Fine," he muttered. "But if this goes badly, don't say I didn't warn you." The days leading up to the lecture were a whirlwind of preparation. Emily worked closely with Henry, helping him design a lesson plan that balanced clarity with engagement. She encouraged him to use real-world examples and anecdotes to make the concepts relatable. Meanwhile, Principal Carter spread the word among staff and students, building anticipation for the event. By Monday morning, nearly everyone at Lincoln High knew that Henry Mitchell would be taking over Ms. Parker's calculus class for one day. When the big day arrived, Henry woke up early, his stomach churning with nerves. He dressed carefully, choosing a clean button-up shirt and slacks instead of his usual janitor uniform. As he drove to school, he rehearsed key points in his head, trying to calm his racing thoughts. When he walked into room 203 that afternoon, he was greeted by rows of curious faces and a sea of whispers. Is that really him? He looked so normal. I heard he solved all those problems perfectly. Henry forced a smile as he set his notes on the desk, avoiding eye contact with the students. Emily gave him an encouraging nod before slipping out of the room, leaving him alone with the class. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, clearing his throat, Henry turned to face the board. All right, he began, his voice steadier than he expected. Today we're going to talk about derivatives. Now I know derivatives sound complicated, but they're actually pretty simple once you break them down. He picked up a piece of chalk and started writing, explaining each step in detail. At first the students watched him cautiously, unsure what to expect. But as he spoke, something remarkable happened. His explanations were clear and easy to follow, peppered with stories from his own experiences learning math. He joked about his struggles admitted when he didn't understand something right away, and emphasized the importance of persistence. Slowly but surely, the tension in the room melted away. One student raised her hand hesitantly. Mr. Mitchell, why do we need to learn this stuff anyway? It seems useless. Henry paused, lowering the chalk. That's a fair question, he said, leaning against the board. When I was your age, I thought the same thing. Why bother with math when it feels so far removed from real life? But later on, I realized something. Math teaches you how to solve problems, not just numbers, but anything. It trains your brain to think logically, to find patterns, to keep going even when things seem impossible. And trust me, that skill comes in handy no matter what you end up doing. The girl nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied with his answer. Others began chiming in with questions, their curiosity growing. By the end of the hour, the classroom buzzed with energy. Students who had once tuned out during lectures were now actively participating, eager to prove they understood the material. When the bell finally rang, several of them lingered behind to thank Henry personally. You made it make sense, one boy said earnestly. I never got it before today. Henry smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, not as a janitor, but as someone capable of making a difference. As he gathered his notes and left the room, he realized something profound. This wasn't just about teaching math. It was about showing people that it's never too late to chase your dreams, no matter where life takes you. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would inspire not just his students but the entire community. The buzz around Henry Mitchell's guest lecture didn't stop at the walls of Lincoln High School. By Wednesday morning, news of his success had reached local newspapers and radio stations. Reporters began calling the school, eager to hear more about the janitor who could solve calculus problems and teach them too. At first, Principal Carter tried to keep things low-key, politely declining interviews and redirecting attention to the school's academic programs. But when a reporter from the Daily Gazette showed up unannounced, camera in hand, it became clear that the story wasn't going away anytime soon. Henry, for his part, was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. He'd never sought recognition, let alone fame, and the idea of being in the spotlight made him deeply uncomfortable. When Carter suggested he sit down for an interview, Henry shook his head firmly. I'm just doing my job, he insisted. There's no need to make a big deal out of this. But Emily Parker saw things differently. Henry, this is a big deal, she said one afternoon after class. People need to hear your story. Not because you're good at math, but because you're proof that it's never too late to follow your passion. That's something worth sharing. Reluctantly, Henry agreed to meet with the reporter. The interview took place in the school library, where shelves lined with books provided a fitting backdrop. Dressed in his usual work uniform, Henry sat awkwardly in a chair as the reporter fired off questions. At first, his answers were short and hesitant, but as the conversation went on, he began to open up. He talked about his love for math, the challenges he faced in college, and how he'd kept learning even while working as a janitor. His honesty resonated with the reporter, who left promising to tell his story fairly. When the article appeared, in the next day's paper it was titled, "The Math Janitor Who Inspired a School." The piece painted Henry as a humble yet extraordinary figure, someone who defied expectations and reminded everyone that greatness can come from anywhere. Photos showed him teaching in the classroom, explaining equations on the board, and smiling warmly at students. Readers couldn't get enough of it. Letters poured into the newspaper office praising Henry, and social media lit up with posts celebrating his achievements. Parents of Lincoln High students were particularly moved. Many wrote heartfelt emails to Principal Carter, thanking him for fostering an environment where someone like Henry could shine. Alumni, inspired by the story, started donating money to support educational initiatives at the school. Within weeks, Lincoln High received enough funding to create a new scholarship program aimed at helping students pursue careers in STEM fields, a legacy directly tied to Henry's impact. For Henry, the newfound attention was both humbling and daunting. Strangers stopped him in the hallway to shake his hand or thank him for inspiring their children. Teachers treated him with newfound respect, often seeking his advice on difficult concepts or classroom strategies. Even the students seemed to view him differently, not just as the friendly janitor, but as someone who understood struggle and perseverance firsthand. Despite all the praise, Henry remained grounded. He continued his regular duties, mopping floors and fixing broken desks without complaint. But now, he also spent more time tutoring students, guiding them through tough problems with patience and care. His sessions became so popular that Principal Carter decided to expand the program, creating a dedicated space for after-school learning called the Math Mentorship Center. Henry was put in charge, overseeing a team of volunteer teachers and older students who wanted to help younger ones succeed. As months passed, Henry found himself growing more confident in his role as a mentor. Encouraged by Emily and Carter, he enrolled in online courses to complete the degree he'd abandoned years earlier. Balancing work, tutoring, and studies wasn't easy, but Henry thrived on the challenge. For the first time in decades, he felt like he was moving toward something meaningful again. One evening, as he sat at his kitchen table poring over a textbook, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily. "You're amazing, you know that? Keep going." Henry smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. He knew he wouldn't have made it this far without the support of people like her and Principal Carter. They had believed in him when he barely believed in himself, giving him a chance to rediscover the joy of math and the joy of teaching. By spring, Henry's influence had spread beyond Lincoln High. Other schools in the district invited him to speak at career days and math workshops, eager to share his story with their own students. Parents brought their kids to hear him talk, hoping his journey would inspire them to dream bigger. Even local businesses got involved, offering internships and scholarships to students interested in STEM fields. At Lincoln High, the ripple effects of Henry's actions continued to grow. Students who once struggled with math were now excelling, thanks in large part to his guidance. Some even declared they wanted to become mathematicians or engineers, citing Henry as their inspiration. Teachers noticed a shift in attitude across the board. Students were more willing to tackle difficult subjects, knowing that failure wasn't the end. Principal Carter often reflected on how much had changed since that fateful morning when Emily handed Henry the calculus worksheet. What had started as a harmless joke had blossomed into something far greater, a movement that touched countless lives. And at the center of it all was Henry Mitchell, a man who refused to let life's obstacles dim his passion. On the last day of the school year, the entire staff gathered in the auditorium for an end-of-year celebration. As Principal Carter stood at the podium, he motioned for Henry to join him on stage. The room erupted into applause as Henry walked up, visibly embarrassed but smiling nonetheless. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carter began, his voice filled with pride. "This year has been unforgettable, thanks in large part to one person. Henry Mitchell reminds us that talent and potential exist in every corner of our community, if only we take the time to notice. He's shown us the power of resilience, humility, and kindness. Let's give him another round of applause as The clapping echoed through the auditorium. Henry looked out at the sea of faces. Teachers, students, administrators, all cheering for him. In that moment, he realized something profound. He hadn't just changed the lives of others. He'd changed his own. What started as a simple act of curiosity had reignited a dream he thought lost forever, proving that sometimes the smallest moments can lead to the biggest transformations. And though Henry would always remain modest about his accomplishments, there was no denying the mark he'd left on Lincoln High, and on everyone lucky enough to witness his journey. Years passed, and Henry Mitchell's name became a legend at Lincoln High School. The man who had once quietly mopped the hallways was now remembered as a symbol of resilience, humility, and untapped potential. His journey from janitor to mentor inspired countless students, teachers, and even strangers who heard his story. But for Henry, life didn't stop after the initial wave of attention faded. Instead, he continued to grow, learn, and give back in ways that left an enduring legacy. By the time he completed his online degree in mathematics, Henry had earned not just a diploma, but also a renewed sense of purpose. With Principal Carter's encouragement, he transitioned from his role as a janitor to become a full-time tutor and part-time instructor at Lincoln High. Though he still helped with maintenance duties occasionally, out of habit more than necessity, he spent most of his days guiding students through challenging concepts and encouraging them to believe in their abilities. Henry's teaching style remained unique. He never relied on rigid lectures or intimidating formulas. Instead, he approached math like a puzzle, breaking it down into pieces anyone could understand. He used real-life examples, calculating distances while driving, figuring out discounts during sales, or even determining how many tiles were needed to retile a bathroom floor. His lessons weren't just about numbers. They were about showing students how math connected to their everyday lives. One of his favorite stories to share was his own. "When I was your age," he'd say, standing in front of the class, "I thought my dreams were over because I couldn't afford college. But guess what? Life has a funny way of giving you second chances, if you're willing to take them." The students listened intently, hanging on to every word. For many, Henry wasn't just a teacher. He was proof that no matter where you start, you can always find a path forward. As the years went by, some of Henry's former students began to make names for themselves. One girl, Sarah, pursued engineering and eventually landed a job designing sustainable energy solutions. Another boy, Marcus, became a high school math teacher, crediting Henry for sparking his love of the subject. Even those who didn't go into STEM fields often wrote to him, thanking him for teaching them skills they use daily: problem-solving, perseverance, and critical thinking. Lincoln High itself underwent changes thanks to Henry's influence. The Math Mentorship Center flourished, expanding its reach to include science and technology programs. Alumni donations kept pouring in, funding scholarships and new equipment for labs. A plaque was placed outside the center, dedicating it to Henry Mitchell, the heart of learning. It read, "Greatness comes from anywhere, if only we take the time to notice." Despite all the accolades, Henry stayed true to himself. He avoided the spotlight whenever possible, preferring to focus on his work rather than bask in praise. Still, there were moments when he couldn't escape recognition. On one occasion, a local university invited him to deliver a keynote speech at their annual education conference. Nervous but honored, Henry accepted. Standing before hundreds of educators, he spoke candidly about his journey, the struggles, the doubts, and the unexpected joys of rediscovering his passion. "I'm not here to tell you I'm special," he said near the end of his speech. "What happened to me could happen to anyone. All it takes is someone believing in you, even if that someone is yourself. Don't let fear or failure stop you. Keep learning, keep trying, and trust that your efforts will matter, even if you can't see it right away." The audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet as Henry stepped off the stage. Among the crowd was Emily Parker, tears streaming down her face. She later told him, "You've changed more lives than you'll ever know, including mine." Eventually, Henry retired from teaching, though he never fully stepped away from education. He volunteered at community centers, helping adults earn their GEDs, and mentored young people interested in pursuing careers in math and science. His home library grew cluttered with textbooks, notebooks, and letters from former students sharing updates on their lives. Each note reminded him why he'd started this journey in the first place. Principal Carter, now retired himself, often visited Henry to reminisce about the old days. "You know," Carter said during one such visit, sipping coffee on Henry's porch, "you didn't just inspire students, you changed the whole culture of our school. People started seeing each other differently, seeing potential where they might have missed it before." Henry chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It wasn't me. It was everyone together. If Ms. Parker hadn't handed me that worksheet, none of this would have happened." "That's true," Carter admitted with a grin. "But she didn't solve those problems, you did. And she didn't teach those kids calculus, you did. Sometimes it's okay to take credit for the good you've done." Henry smiled, gazing out at the quiet neighborhood street. He thought about all the twists and turns his life had taken, from dropping out of college to standing in front of classrooms filled with eager students. It wasn't the path he'd imagined for himself, but it was one he wouldn't trade for anything. Today, Lincoln High School stands as a testament to Henry Mitchell's impact. Every year, graduating seniors gather in the auditorium to hear a speech from a chosen faculty member. Without fail, they ask Henry to speak, even though he officially retired years ago. Sitting in the front row, surrounded by proud parents and cheering students, Henry reflects on how far he's come and how much farther others will go because of the seeds he planted. He begins each speech the same way. "When I was your age, I thought my story was over. But here I am today, still learning, still growing, still finding ways to help others do the same. Your story isn't over either. No matter where you are or what you're facing, remember this. Greatness can come from anywhere. All it takes is a little faith and maybe a calculus worksheet." The room erupts in laughter and applause, and Henry feels a warmth spread through his chest. He knows his journey won't last forever, but the lessons he's shared will. Somewhere, out there, a student is solving a problem they once thought impossible, thanks to the example he set. And that, he realizes, is the greatest reward of all.